George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. Mr. Ricky Brown wants to diversify New York. Well, actually, that's the name of his business. And he helps women and minority-owned businesses get the money here in New York and other places. Ricky Brown joins us on the program. Ricky, past recipient, did you get the Black Equity Grant back in the day? Did you get that as well?
No, I am on the committee.
You are. So you help other
Yes.
people get the Black Equity
Yes.
as part of the Central New York Community Foundation. But there
Absolutely.
you got a big grant some years ago, right?
Yes. The Alliance for Economic Conclusion was a $30 million pot of money that came through Onondaga County. Essentially, it was to address any barriers and obstacles to overcoming poverty. My company's primary role was in helping minority and women-owned businesses get government contracting opportunities through their local municipalities, which included Onondaga County and the city of Syracuse, as well as the state of New York.
And so you do that to diversify New York. So tell us you gave us a little tease. What else does Diversify New York do? I know it as helping MWBEs get certified. And so I know that's part of what you do.
Absolutely. So we were founded in 2015. The organization's primary consultative practice at the time was in New York State MWBE certification, which is Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise certification. Unfortunately, many of us in our community don't understand that is actual legal terminology. It is a legal designation. It is not enough for you to be brown, Black or brown, and own a business and just clarify and declare yourself a minority-owned business. It is a legal program whereby you have to go through an application process with the state of New York or your local municipalities. And in my case, I live in the city of Syracuse. So the city of Syracuse has an MWBE certification program as well. But on the state level, the reason we chose to focus on that state certification is you can go through that process and your certification, MWBE certification, is good throughout New York State. If you do it individually by declaring yourself a minority or a woman-owned business through your local municipality, your certification is only good within that municipality. In other words, I certify with the city of Syracuse, but then an opportunity comes up in the city of Rochester and I want to participate, but I am not certified with the city of Rochester because I went through the city of Syracuse's process. Conversely, if you did it with New York State, that certification carries throughout. It has superseding authority over the other.
That's what I was going to ask you, because
Yes.
I knew back in the day, way back, and I mean many, many, many years ago, we wanted you to have all of them, right? We wanted you to have
Yes.
the federal. We wanted you to have this. I mean, the state wouldn't accept the city, but the city wouldn't necessarily accept the state. But now the fact that the state certification will supersede local municipalities is a big deal. And people debate. So what are the benefits of certification? Because you don't have to certify, but what are the benefits of certification?
No, and I'm glad you brought that question up because there's a lot of misconception in and around if I should complete the process. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks to participating in that program? Number one, again, not only is it a legal designation for you to go through and declare yourself a minority or woman-owned business enterprise, but a specific portion of New York State's budget is legally designated to be spent only with the firms that have completed that process. In our case, New York State has one of the highest utilization goals in the country at over 30%. So firms would need 30% of New York State's budget, in other words, is set aside specifically for minority and women-owned businesses who have gone through that certification process. So the number one benefit to that is there is a set aside, if you will, for those businesses that have gone through that process. And if you are not certified, then you don't qualify for that contracting pool. When you look at the trillions and trillions of dollars that are spent within New York State's budget, it would behoove you to go through that process and make sure that you're listed within the state's directory. You can only do that again if you have completed the state's process, declared yourself an MWBE, not declared yourself because the state gives you the designation. You can apply, the state will award you the designation. And then, as each of those respective departments throughout New York State are charged with meeting that 30% goal, they have to utilize the directory that lists those MWBEs throughout the state. So that's the primary benefit of participating in that program. Conversely, for those of us who opt not to go through that program.
And are you one of those people that opted not to?
No, I am New York State certified.
Oh, okay. But you
from
just
my inception.
yes.
You
But
know, it would be very difficult to advocate for a position as a minority-owned business and not be participating in the program. And in fact, I can speak to the personal benefits of going through there. The award that you mentioned at the beginning of the program, I was one of only 2 MWBEs that were selected from that $30 million pot of money that was awarded to Onondaga County. I received the 3-year grant in excess of $336,000 odd dollars as a technical assistance provider to make sure that other minority and women-owned businesses were participating in that program.
But you were going to say, but for those of us who choose not to do it.
Yes, for those of us who choose not to do it, you stand a chance of further disenfranchising other minority-owned businesses simply by avoiding going through that process. And what I mean by that is typically, and before there was any consequences for organizations that did not spend up to that 30%, they could issue something called a waiver.
Right.
A waiver simply means I could not find any minority or women-owned businesses that were participating. So
I got the language for you. As a former MBE officer, the language is good faith effort.
Yes. So thank you. That language allowed so many institutions or the systematic failure, if you will, for us in terms of diversity and inclusion, to allow firms again to simply declare, I made a good faith effort. By good faith effort, it could simply mean, hey, I looked in the phone book. None of those companies look black or brown to me, so I couldn't find any. And they would simply get a waiver. The waiver approval rate at the time, at least 3 years ago, was in excess of 97% of the time that they asked for a waiver in New York State, it was granted.
How much of what was that percentage again?
Over 97%, unfortunately.
So that's the point. So 30% utilization rate, which is the rate that the state says of your contracting, 30% of your spending should be with these businesses. Right. If the pool isn't available, quote unquote, and so I bring that up because you're very careful with your language. You said my self-declaration as a black-owned business in this case, right, is not enough for the state to count their utilization or contracting with you to meet any of their goals. And so I can tell you, as someone who is still in that process or haven't started really, but I actually lost the contract because of that.
Oh, wow.
Because the entity that I was dealing with said they got to meet their 30%, and their spending with me, though, they got what they needed. They couldn't get that. They couldn't count that, even though, right?
Exactly.
And when I say lost, but that's what the sister told me. She's like, yeah, because you're not certified, we got to go this way, because if you were, we could just keep going, right?
Exactly.
So that should have been enough for me to do it right then and there. But we're in the process. We're in the process.
I'm glad to hear you're going through it.
Well, I mean, we're going to start the process. That's what I mean.
Come on, George. I got to get you on board. Let's go.
Yeah. We're going to do that. But I mentioned that to say, yeah, you can choose not to do it. But again, these are the benefits, right? That to do, because now you're in a pool and you're available. And like you said, Ricky, you were one of 2 to receive a contract to provide assistance to other people to become certified as well. So this is really important information for folk. The other question I have about state certification, because you mentioned entities. Again, back in the day, you had multiple entities within the state that required certification. Has that been eliminated, or does the one size fit all?
No, so that certification again supersedes everything across the state. They've done a
Okay.
great job of soliciting advice from the MWBE community. They understand where there were systematic failures throughout the program, and they've done a great job in at least attempting to rectify where some of the wrongs were in the program. We've got some great state legislators. I know Khalid Bey, Pam Hunter, a few other local politicians have always worked on this issue, but until it became codified into law, and until we had state legislators who were advocating on behalf of minorities to add teeth to the legislation, for example. So before, again, it was enough to simply issue a good faith effort, and you could apply for a waiver and receive that waiver. But New York State decided to get tougher throughout that program, as utilization rates still hovered well below the 30% that they were looking for. And that allowed some of us, again, to proliferate under this legislation. We've gotten further opportunities, so on and so forth. But George, here's some stark numbers that we need to understand specifically in and around Central New York and in terms of participation in this program. If you looked at a 5-county landscape of Central New York and MWBE businesses, less than 5% of the eligible minority and women-owned businesses in the Central New York landscape are actually participating in that program.
Who are certified?
Who are certified with New York State.
Wow.
So if you account for all of the LLCs, the DBAs, the so on and so forth that are certified not certified, that are minority-owned businesses that have either, again, an LLC or a DBA, less than 5% of us are actually participating in that program. When you look at the economic landscape of Central New York, some of the disparate poverty numbers, not only number one in the country for child poverty, but really disparate numbers across the board. When you look at where we are economically as Black and brown folks, we still rank in the top 10 poorest minorities, Black people in particular, in the country. And a lot of that, again, is because we are economically disenfranchised. Some of that onus, of course, is on New York State, but we've got to take a greater responsibility in being aware of what this program is, how do we participate, and how do we make sure that we're involved in this program. Otherwise, that money just goes either downstate to Western New York or to white-owned businesses that already have a preponderance of the New York State budget that's allocated to them.
Talking to Ricky Brown, he's the president of Diversify New York, and he's a consultant technical assistance provider as well. They work with businesses, helping them to navigate contracting opportunities here in the state of New York and the city of Syracuse. And we're talking specifically about the benefits of state certification in New York State certification. And what I was getting at, and you clarified this for me around back in the day, again, I did this many years ago, in 1988, 1992, I think, 1994, I think, that's when I did it, right? That's when the last time I used to do this. And at the time, the DOT had its own certification, right, in the state. So the fact that the state certification now covers all of the contracting entities. Go ahead, Ricky.
George, I'm glad you mentioned that specific department.
Okay.
Because there is a distinction between some specific certifications. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what they are.
Okay, DOT meaning Department of Transportation. Go ahead.
Yes. And the Department of transportation's certification is so critically important and so distinct from the MWBE program in light of the $2.5 billion infrastructure project, I-81, that is coming to Syracuse. So the distinction between those programs, when you say MWBE, the DOT does have an MWBE program. All of the other requisite departments across New York State participate in the Division of Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprises. However, when you are specifically looking at a highway project, a Department of Transportation, which is oftentimes federally funded and utilizes federal dollars to get those highways built, they have a distinct certification that is different from the MWBE, and it is called DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. The reason why that is so critically important is of that $2.5 billion, some 80% of that project will be designated for folks that are DBE certified. Again, this is a distinctly different program than MWBE, which is based on both race and gender. The DBE program, as its moniker indicates, is based on any number of disadvantages a business may face. It is not restricted to race. So
Right.
there may be a white-owned business that has a DBE certification, for example. But until we are clear on the distinction between those programs, we stand to be disenfranchised. As I looked at the DBE certifications for I-81 in our Central New York footprint, for example, there are less than 10 of those minority-owned businesses that have a DBE certification that are now participating in a $2.5 billion infrastructure project.
$2.5 billion, less than 10, right?
Less than 10.
So, okay. So if I'm getting my state certification for MWBE, do I just submit the same information to the DOT and get that certification, or is it another series of steps?
Oh, George, I love, I feel like you have a cheat sheet somewhere along the line. Your questions are right on point. A lot of folks are unaware that you can actually do a dual certification with one application in New York State. So you can actually apply for your DBE simultaneously as you're submitting for the MWBE. The issue is that a lot of folks that are not in the trucking field specifically, or that don't intend to do work with the Department of Transportation, neglect to go through that simultaneous certification process. The other thing with that is we are so often ill-informed of what opportunities may exist and if there's work. So I don't own a truck, so I would think, well, what work is the DOT going to have for me?
Right.
But there are companies that do things as simple as painting the stripes on roads.
Right.
They supply the cones, the safety cones that are put out. They supply the safety vests that the workers are wearing on that site. So if you do any number of those things, even if it was debris removal, it can be deconstruction. It doesn't have to be the actual construction. You don't need to necessarily be involved in road work. It would behoove you to understand what the exact needs of that project are, to make sure that you're not leaving yourself out of an opportunity. So I think that the best thing that we can do as a community is make sure, again, that this information is out there and folks are aware. You don't need to own a truck in order to participate in DOT contracting opportunities. If your business is a supplier of sorts, or if you have any construction related experience, it may be you may want to look at what that certification process is like for you, and if you should be doing a dual certification instead of just the MWBE.
Well, that's really important to note, because and that's why when UMEA used to be with UMEA, the Upstate Minority Economic Alliance, that's why when they have these workshops, this is why you have to attend, because just like with the Micron, there are ancillary opportunities that may not be directly related to the highway construction. Just like you explained, there might be, there's supplies, there's all kinds of ancillary services that you might be able to provide to a company who is looking to meet their 30% threshold on every single contract that is awarded through the state of New York. And so this is some important information. Ricky, you also indicated that there's some information that businesses locally should make themselves aware of. What are some of those things?
And number one, again, as we talk about the certification process, I think you're very clear in indicating whether or not we should be participating in those. And just 1 second, George, I want to bring up a note of something that I was just looking at. And one of the other things in terms of what we provide as a New York State certified technical assistance provider, we don't just focus on registering your business and certifying with New York State. There are a number of ancillary needs that those firms would need in order to qualify in the first place. So that goes from everything from business formation to performing something called a capability statement, which is essentially a one-page resume for your business as opposed to your personal resume, indicating what type of services you offer, what codes that you would register with New York State as you're participating in their programs. But most importantly, right now, the thing that's a hot topic is something called the beneficial ownership report. If you're unfamiliar with that, essentially the US government has come out with some new stipulations indicating before you used to be able to have anonymity behind forming a business where you could layer it behind, an LLC or several layers of a corporation or subsidiaries. And because of some things post 11, the government is now requiring that those owners have their names on file with the U.S. government. And essentially, if anybody wanted to, launch any litigation or so on and so forth, they would know who the true owners of that business are.
Used to be a shield, right?
It used to be a shield. And so they're fighting hard. The beneficial ownership report was some legislation that was passed federally that required anybody that had previously owned an LLC or filed an LLC, you would now have to attach your name to that, file with the federal government indicating your name, address, and essentially where you could be served. But the shield essentially was gone. The important piece for today was you were going to be fined if you did not complete that beneficial ownership report by 12/31. You could be fined $595 per day, up to $100,000 until that was completed. The good news I received just as of this afternoon, as a matter of fact, was that there was an injunction that was filed on behalf of business owners around the country. So at this point, that's been put on hold. I fear that a large swath of our community is unaware of these rule changes and may not understand that they have to file that information. Especially many of us are first generation business owners, just really aren't really active in terms of seeking out this information. So it's really important that folks know, please look up this information when you have the opportunity. It is called the Beneficial Ownership Report. Please keep yourself apprised of what new dates that are coming out. The injunction is only temporary. So at any point, and especially with the new administration coming into office, that injunction could be overridden at any point. You'll be required to file that information. And again, it is a $595 per day fine until you are brought into compliance with that.
$595 a day.
That's up to $100,000. Yes.
Ooh, that's nasty, bro.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Ricky. So with that being said, final thoughts for listeners around the work that you do and how people connect with you.
Yes. Just please be aware that this program exists up and down throughout any departments that have New York State budgets that are attached to it. Oftentimes, we don't think of places like SUNY Upstate, SUNY Brockport. All of those institutions have state funds that are attached to their budgets. Anytime that they are looking for anything from office supplies, services that are needed, which, George, the fastest growing segment within the MWBE program is actually services that provided. So, for example, I don't own any products. I don't sell products. I don't offer toilet paper, office supplies, or any of those other things. But New York State would still contract with me to provide a service in the form of technical assistance, for example. So even if you are a service-oriented business, understand that there are opportunities for you to participate. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. You're free to take a look at my website, which has tons of information around the program. It is www.diversify-New York, spelled out, .org. Again, tons of information related to that program, and not only the New York State MWBE certification, but the DBE, federal programs such as 8A, SBA, and any number of programs that require you to go through a certification process. We're here to help. Please feel free to reach out.
All right, that's Rickey Brown, Diversify-NY.
Diversify New York, spelled out. So it's NEWYORK.
Okay, NEWYORK.com.
.org.
.org.
Yes,
Diversify-NEWYORK.org. Rickey Brown, President, thank you so much for being on the program, George, and for the information. And we spend most of our time on New York State, but as he mentioned, there's other certifications, federal as well, and they can help you with those too. A little bit more rigorous, but still, you get in that pool and you're really cooking with gas. All right, Rickey Brown, thank you so much. Inspiration for the Nation.
Thank you, George.
Okay.